I'm Diana.
And I'm Janine, and we are the lucky ladies who get to sit here with Al Olivari, who is the Staff Sergeant, Toggler Gunner for the United States Air Force. And we are here to listen to Mr. Olivari's story during World War II.
Hi, Mr. Olivari.
Hi.
Thank you for allowing us to interview you today.
My pleasure.
So, I'd like to start from the beginning and just find out what you knew about the war prior to entering the service.
Well, prior to entering the service, I was an aircraft inspector for the Grumman Corporation. They manufactured the Navy planes. And really what I knew about the war in Europe was that Hitler was overrunning all the different countries. But I didn't know any more than just that he was just France, Belgium, Poland. There was no end to his conquering the different nations, and the British had all to do to hold their own, and eventually they needed our assistance and participation to help defeat this monster of a dictator, as we can think of him as a monster. And from there, I had insight on the war. On and off, I had opportunities to go to the movies. And at that time, they had Fox Movietone News. And generally, the Fox Movietone News, it was monopolized with the war in Europe. Not the Pacific too much, but mainly the war in Europe. And while watching these movies, you see my older brother, my brother who was my senior by many years, he was already a ball turret gunner on a B-17. And many times I'd see clippings of the B-17s over Germany, and I would think, I wonder which of those bombers my brother was in. But at any rate, that's all I knew about the war. I didn't know anything about the atrocities, what were happening to the Jewish people or to the Gypsies or to the Catholics. I knew nothing about that. All I knew is there was an all-out war. And there was no end to what Hitler had in mind, as he may have wanted to conquer the world eventually. Finally, my time came, and I was inducted into the service in February of 1943.
Were you drafted, or did you volunteer?
I was inducted into the service. And I had a beautiful letter from the Grumman Corporation to place me in a position that I can be best used in aviation. Well, as I was being classified at the induction center, it so happened that of the many things that I did before going into service, I worked in a hospital as an assistant to the nursing staff. And my classifier said, "Boy, do we need people in the medical service." Well, I jumped up out of my seat and I pounded my hand on the table. I said, "You do that to me, and I'll be the worst soldier in the military service. I'll be going AWOL. I'll be the worst soldier." I said, "Can't you see that beautiful letter that I placed before you from the Grumman Corporation?" So one thing led to another, and he said, "Look, I'll see what I can do for you." Well, at any rate, I'll progress a little faster so we get to other things. So I was sent to basic training at Miami Beach, and then to specialized school in armament in Denver, Colorado. And while I was there, I thought the next step would have been assignment to a gunnery school. And my friends indicated, "Look, they have announcements for aviation cadet." And I said, "Gee, I'd like to be an officer." So I went and I took the different tests that they placed us through. And I passed the test, and the next step was the interview with the various commanding officers before the selection was made. So I entered this room with, it must have been a half a dozen officers, and it was obvious some of them already were in combat. They had all kinds of decorations. And they told me to be at ease, and with my legs spread and my hands behind my back, I said, "Gentlemen, I'd like to mention that as I'm here talking to you, my brother is a ball-turret gunner in the 8th Air Force, and he's probably flying a mission over Germany at this very moment. And my first interest is being an officer in the Air Force. But if for any reason I don't meet the requirements, I'd like some assurance." That's the way I put it. You can't say that, you know, in the military, but I'd like some assurance that if I don't make it as an officer, that there's a place for me in a combat crew on the B-17. So I left it there. So eventually, after about 6 months as an aviation cadet, and I thought, gee, I'm getting close to it now, but there was a big washout. You see, they had all the officers that they needed in the military. The war was coming gradually down to, not to an end, but it was getting pretty close. And so I didn't have the highest scholastic rating and all that, like many others. And they just kept the highest scoring cadets. So I was sent to a reclassification center. So I was placed there, and gee, I was really worried at that point. I said I was worried. I was thinking, I wonder where in the military they're going to place me now. So on the 4th day, I received orders to report to Kingman, Arizona. Well, this was the 8th Air Force Aerial Gunnery School. Well, I said, gee, I'm in the Air Force. So I was there, and I did my training there. And then from there, I was sent to Tampa, Florida, where I met my crew for the first time at Drew Field, Florida. We all came from different parts of the country. There were 9 of us all together. Some from Pennsylvania, some from the iron mills of Ohio, some from Texas, cowboys, and some from New England like myself. I came from Long Island, New York. And we met for the first time, and it was a get to know each other. And at that point, the pilot already had his folders on each of us, and he knew our specialties. And he pointed to each of us, and he started with me, of course. He said, I want you as the nose gunner, toggle there. And he went down the list. Well, the radio operator was established. The engineer was established, but the ball turret, he made the assignment there, the waist gunners and the tail gunner. He says, now, if there's any questions, I want to hear them now. If you have any objections to the assignment that was made, I want to hear it now. No one said a word. We all accepted our assignments. Well, we went into training. We completed our training after 6 weeks, and we went on all kinds of maneuvers. He put the plane through all kinds of deep, steep turns so we could get the sensation of what it was like in a bomber if for any reason it was going down or was making erratic turns. And you got a feel as to what the forces of stress in the plane was like. So at any rate, we completed, and then we were assigned a brand new plane. We reported to Hunterfield, Georgia. And at Hunterfield, Georgia, the pilot he signed for a brand new B-17. And he said, this is our plane, men. He said, we got to take good care of it. We have to deliver it to someone, I don't know who, but we'll get orders a little further along our trip. So our first stop was Maine, Bangor, Maine. And at that point, we stayed there overnight. He received the orders. And we took off, and we all knew we had to go to England. This was the northern route. And 1 hour, he was not to open the orders for 1 hour after we left Maine. Then he opened the orders, and he said, yes, we're going to England. He says, our first stop is Goose Bay, Maine, Goose Bay, Labrador. And I never saw so much snow in all my life. But we landed there, and eventually we took off after we were snowed in for about a week. And the next stop was Reykjavik, Iceland. And I never saw so much ice and snow in that place, too. So we stayed there. The weather was very bad. In fact, we were coming in for a landing there, and the pilot calls me on the plane. He says, Al, he says, the report is that there's a light drizzle and the runways are like a sheet of ice. He says, I'm going to just touch the brakes lightly, and the plane is going to slide sideways down the runway. So I don't want you to get excited. So that's exactly what happened. Eventually we came to a stop, we stayed there, and eventually we took off. Well, the next stop was Scotland, and our stop in Scotland was Prestwick, and the authorities there met us. They took over the plane, and that was their job then, to fit it up for combat with guns and everything else that had to be placed on it. Then we went to our base, and when we arrived at our base, at that point the officers were separated from the enlisted men, which I was an enlisted man. We had our own Quonset hut, they had their own quarters. When we reported to our quarters, we were replacing a crew that already had been shot down. And in the ceiling of this Quonset hut were all the targets that I'm getting emotional.
Why does it make you emotional?
Well, it does. At any rate, the crew before us, they were shot down over Germany. No survivors. And this ceiling had paintings of all the different German cities that the previous crews had flown to. Well, we settled down and we realized, we looked at each other. We were babes in the woods, I have to say that. We looked at one another. I was the oldest person among them. They called me Pop. You know, I was 23, going on 24. They were 18 and 19. And I said, look, we're in the big time now. I remember saying that. So at any rate, we went into orientation and one thing and another, and then we got our first mission. And the first mission was with a different crew. So we got the feel of being with an experienced crew in combat. And then we were placed together, and we flew our missions. Well, all this time I didn't know anything about the atrocities as what was happening in Germany, other than Hitler was conquering all the nations. And no one in my crew knew anything more than I did. I asked my pilot, he said, anything that we need to know? He said, no. He said, all we know is that Hitler is taken and there's no end to him. Now he's got to contend with Russia. But then we found that he was breaking ties with Russia. And Russia was his enemy. And that was in our favor. But when it came to that, we were flying many, many missions close to the border where the Russians were. And on some of my missions, when we knew we were close to the Russian border, before the missions, we were given these American flags with the Russian inscription on them, and we'd have them clipped to our flight outfit before we went on a mission. Could be no time once you're in combat to put them on. And basically what the inscription says is that I'm an American, and we were advised if we're ever shot down, don't go reaching for anything, put your hands up immediately and point to that. And that has the Russian inscription that I am an American, and it even goes further in Russian.
Wow,
what was it like being in a bomber in combat? Well, in England, the weather was horrible. The fog over England and the European continent was like 7,000 feet thick before you got through it. Now, if you can picture all the different bombers through England going on a mission, And when I was flying, I'm speaking of 1,500 bombers going on a mission. Many times only 1,000, but many times 1,500. And one time on a Berlin raid, and I have this here, I have the magazine and all, on February the 3rd, there were 2,000 planes. This was the final wipeout of Berlin, and I was on that mission. But you have to picture what I just previously told you, that there's 7,000 feet of thick, heavy fog all the way up. How do they get all these planes off the bases in England to get them up in the air, to form in a group, in a formation where they can proceed to the target area? Well, at briefing, the pilots, navigators, and co-pilots are given very brief instructions, and the engineers on the plane. The plane has to be flown at a certain rate of speed, a certain rate of climb, and stay within a certain perimeter over the airbase, like a cone going up. In the beginning, my pilot would make a comment to me. He says, "Now, Al," he says, "you know, if you see a red light and a green light, a red light on your right-hand side and a green light on your left-hand side coming towards us, don't bother to call me, it's too late." In other words, there's a plane coming towards us. Generally, the green light's on the right-hand side and the red light is on the left-hand side. So he'd say that as a joke. So at any rate, we'd get through it. And climbing through this, I said, "I see light," and the pilot, "Come on, I see it too." They said, we break through it, and the sun is shining bright at this point. And as far as the eye can see, white puffy clouds with all black specks coming up all over England. And all these bombers are forming formation to get together. And as they're forming formation, they're climbing higher and higher and getting ready to cross the English Channel. When we're in our formation flying, there's the high squadron, the mid squadron, and the low squadron. And there's a lead plane in each formation. The lead plane and a deputy lead. These are the only two planes that have a bomb sight in them. All the other planes, including mine, I never saw the Northern bomb sight. I was never permitted to see it. But there were in the two planes up ahead. These were the bombardiers who had planned the mission. They knew just where to start dropping the bombs. So at any rate, as the planes are forming and they're proceeding across the English Channel, the pilot would come on and alert each one of us, "Test fire your guns." Because if we don't test fire them at low altitude, we're about 10, 12,000 feet now, we're on oxygen already. They're definitely not going to function when we're up at 40, 50, and 60 below zero. That's how cold it is at 28,000 feet on many of these missions. So at any rate, we're proceeding across the channel. We test fire our guns, and I'm somewhat relaxed in my position. I'm looking over my equipment, and a crash comes through the plexiglass of the plane and hits me in the lower extremities. It knocks me off the seat. And I'm in excruciating pain, like I really thought I was hit by a 50 caliber machine gun. And I'm on the floor of the plane, and I call the pilot on the intercom. I said, "I've been hit." He said, "I don't believe it." He said, "We're not in combat yet. There are no enemy planes around." And as we're talking on the floor of the plane, alongside of me, I see an empty cartridge from a 50 caliber brass cartridge, and that's what came through. You see, there were three positions on the plane where we can't salvage. That was valuable material in combat. Brass. The tail gunner, the ball turret, and the nose position, those empty shells go out into the atmosphere. And in this case, one happened to be in the path of our plane and hit me. Fortunately, I didn't have any damage. So when we landed on that mission, the pilot, before we went to briefing, after every mission we had to go to briefing, He said, I want you to lower your clothes. I said, I want to see the area you were hit. I have to report on it. Well, my body was all black and blue, black and blue. But I didn't break any skin, and I wasn't entitled to any Purple Heart. So we went on and on the mission. So at 28,000, that's what the temperature is. Now, many times the fighters had come head on. Sometimes they'd come from underneath, and the ball turret gunner was busy as can be. Sometimes they'd try side attacks. But at any rate, all in all, I've completed 26 missions in all. Now, as I was saying, some of the missions that I flew were pretty close to the Russians. And after we dropped our bombs, our exit from Germany was out through the North Sea. And many times the pilot would point out to us and the crew, he says, you see to the right, that's where all the German scientists are. That's where they're building those rockets that are bombing London and all the different locations in England. And they have plans to have them sent right to New York City and Washington, D.C. eventually. So at any rate, that was coming to an end fast. As the Russians came in, they were anxious to get to those scientists before the British and the Americans did, but we all got our share. Back to all the atrocities in Germany, I just never heard of anyone mentioning that people were being placed in the incinerators and other atrocities, experimenting on human beings, their brains, their body, and so forth. I flew on 2 different crews, and there were Jewish gunners on those, and I asked them, they just were not aware of anything happening, particularly to the German or the Jewish people. But
Even though you didn't see their faces, do you feel like you saved people?
I'm sorry?
Even though you didn't see their faces, do you feel like you saved many people?
Well, I think I did my part. Everyone that was in the service did their part. And it's a horrible situation to be in, to be singled out like that. And well, at any rate, the war was coming to an end, and I was placed on another crew for a period of time for different reasons. They wanted to place a commissioned officer on the plane that I was trained with my friends. It's something when you're together with, it's like a family, you know, you're blood relatives almost. But I just accepted the assignment. It had to be that way. You can't say I don't want to go. You're a soldier and you got to do as you're told. And everything worked out fine. And yeah, one time on the second crew that I was with, they had a bombardier that I think it was his 3rd or 4th mission, and we were in heavy anti-aircraft, and it shook us up, and we were separated from the entire group. We were a straggler in the sky. It happened over southern France, in fact, and the pilot says to the navigator, really, I need a fix so I know what direction we're going in. And together with the navigator, I knew a little bit about navigation because I had experience as a cadet, a little bit basic stuff. So together we put our heads together and we got a fix, and that was it. So we found our way back to England all by ourselves. We were not in a formation at all. This was the second crew I flew with.